Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I represent the state of South Dakota, so I appreciate all of you being here. Out of the top 11 counties in this nation that are struck with poverty, I have 5 of them in my state. Many of them are on tribal lands and hit my Native American tribes, and it's generational poverty. I believe that a lot of the people in South Dakota face and utilize programs, but yet it's not necessarily lifting them out of the programs and getting the results that we truly do need. We have a very low unemployment rate in our state, but in some areas we have 85% unemployment just because of where they're located, lack of economic development, but also because we haven't had the ability to have programs that truly gave the workforce training that we needed and the infrastructure that we needed to really change their lives. So I'm very interested in reforming these programs so that we see more results. And I guess, Mr. Davis, I would like to ask you in particular, because of your experience on this committee in the past, how many of these programs that we see displayed throughout the committee hearing on the chart have been evaluated for their effectiveness that you're aware of?
Well, I think the question is there are evaluations that take place internally and reports that are submitted by agencies, but the one problem that I found early on where Ranking Member Doggett and I chose to take the issue of data standardization is there were no common systems of measurement. And I think one of the areas where the parties can talk past each other is to say anytime the issue of cost control is raised that we're advocating cutting or elimination of the programs. When we look at populations in need, there are processes or gaps that are created that create excessive cost because of excessive time or the problems that a person has simply to access those benefits. And this can be heightened in rural areas simply because of the distance and lack of proximity to any type of primary care services. What we found, I think, conclusively, and it really follows a pattern of any organization that begins to move in this direction to optimize performance. Yes, technically the commercial term might be cutting cost, but I think realistically as you're creating capacity and opportunity for those additional dollars that may be spent for overhead that can be redirected into other areas.
Well, I think we all certainly want to make sure that the taxpayers' dollars are being well spent and that they're actually beneficial and not being wasted or abused in some manner like we heard discussed earlier. But I'm more interested in making sure that they actually work, that we don't continue to spend money that doesn't work. So there's not a standardized evaluation system at all that we see rise to the top in most of these programs. Is there one that you would recommend, or at least 3 or 4 different triggers we should be watching in these programs that would show this program is effective?
Well, I would say that each customer area, if you will, is different. In different types of businesses, for example, that use data warehousing, as we discussed earlier, and build these logical data models, they'll take, say, each individual customer will have, say, 15 to 17,000 attributes in one file about them, and it's in order to serve them better. A retail outlet might have a completely different objective in selling person clothes than, say, a bank. In a banking system or in detecting credit card fraud or ways to serve or sell more services to that customer, data scientists working with business operations professionals simply develop algorithms or analytic tools to identify what those needs are, and every time that there's an input in the system, it updates to that central data record. So I might be an educator, and Ms. Corrigan might be a housing person, and an unrelated TANF or SNAP situation happens, something is input in that system, and I suddenly realize my person has lost their job, and I have a child now possibly moving out of a school district. Is there a way to preempt that? She might find there's an issue with housing that has to be addressed immediately, and rather than, say, making your person on the tribal land have to drive 50 miles if they have a car or find that, the time can be overwhelming, and it can create a situation that causes hopelessness where folks just give up.
Yeah.
And I think if we look in our own lives at that, we've all felt those kinds of pressures in different areas, and what we're talking about is simply simplifying that process so that we can serve more effectively. And I think the rhetoric of eliminate or cut, or somehow the motive of someone on benefits is bad, or the desire of one side is simply to pour more money, it isn't really the case. I think we're looking at a very clinical process problem that once fixed can model much of the best of the commercial sector.
So perhaps the first step would be making sure that we have an area where data can be collected, that all programs can utilize and look at the same family entity that's accessing these programs, So we're starting with the same data point. Is that what you're suggesting?
Exactly. And then from that place, each agency could draw the data or the analytics that they needed to serve more effectively, but it's all populated in one area. And what would come with that, frankly, is predictive modeling, where you would, in effect, be able to begin to see trends in advance of the likelihood of, say, a child going into crisis, potential domestic abuse situations that are going on, addressing what's done, for example, from a jail database management process that can not only affect in real time a do not pay stop on benefits, but if there's a child involved, it could trigger someone else to make sure that that child's needs are met effectively so they don't fall through the system. And I think creating additional workarounds is not the answer. The idea is simplifying this data to get a realistic picture of what's happening so that the frontline workers can help in real time.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, I know I'm out of time, but I do want to talk about the importance of having a sense of urgency on these programs. Some of my tribes right now are dealing with the suicide epidemic of their youth because they feel hopeless. And they've seen these programs continue to be utilized among their people and not get them out of poverty and not give them a hope for a future. And that's why I don't think I think it's critical that we don't just have this hearing and talk about this. It's critical that we take the ideas and suggestions that we've heard today from our witnesses and utilize them to reform these programs so that they work and get people off programs and providing for their families. With that, I yield back.
I can assure my colleague that's the intent, and that is to move forward with policy that will help Americans in need. With that, we'll now yield to Mr. Young.